The world of Berudim, the gate of clarifications, arises after the shattering of the vessels of nikudim, when the divine light, once scattered in fragments, begins its long journey toward reintegration and order. In Berudim, the sparks that fell into separation are gathered and purified, and the lights of the 10 Sephirot begin to include, each illuminating and tempering the others. This is the dawn of harmony after the storm of disintegration, yet it is not an effortless peace, but the result of a deliberate, conscious labor. The work of the soul that participates in the divine act of tikkun guides the practitioner who enters Sha'ar HaBerudim must first understand that this gate represents the beginning of the true inner work of repair, where multiplicity and difference are not annihilated but clarified, refined, and reconciled through an alchemy of awareness. The divine intention in Berudim is not to erase the distinctions that emerged in the breaking but to reveal their proper place within unity. Thus, in study and practice, one approaches this gate with reverence for the details of existence, for in Berudim each distinction is itself a vessel for light. The first meditative orientation is therefore that of clear seeing. The adept sits in stillness, letting perception grow luminous until the multiplicity of thoughts, sensations, and impressions becomes transparent, each thing distinct and yet known in its rootedness in the One. This is the contemplative essence of Birur, to clarify without severing, to distinguish without separating, to see the divine image shimmering within every particular. The technique begins in breath, for breath is the bridge between the broken and the whole. The practitioner takes slow inhalations, allowing awareness to descend with the air into the depths of the heart, and on each exhalation releases the subtle impulse to control or categorize experience. Over time, distinctions appear of themselves, as though the soul's vision were washed clean. This emotion belongs to Chizd, this impulse to Shevirat, this thought to Tiferet. Each faculty is recognized in its nature and offered to its corresponding Sephirah, establishing harmony among the inner vessels. The ritual form of Berudim deepens this internal clarification through the practice known as the Yichud of inter-inclusion, Yichud HaKavanot. Here the adept envisions the 10 Sephirot not as isolated spheres, but as a living web of mutual penetration, each quality containing and being contained by all the others. The light of Chokmah illuminates Bina, Bina tempers Chokmah, Chizd softens Shevirat, and Shevirat gives form to Chizd. Tiferet harmonizes them both. The visualization proceeds in breath cycles of 10, each inhalation drawing one Sephirah into awareness, each exhalation weaving it with the others. After a full cycle, the adept dwells in the perception of total interpenetration, the soul vibrating as a miniature cosmos of Berudim. This practice refines perception itself. The mind learns to see relationships rather than isolated points, patterns rather than fragments, and soon the practitioner perceives life itself as a vast tapestry of reciprocal influences, each thread carrying divine significance. To study Sha'ar HaBerudim intellectually is to enter into the structure of Luria's own Etz Chaim, for this gate stands as the hinge between chaos and order, between the world of points and the world of rectified faces. The student must therefore cultivate both contemplation and disciplined analysis. The proper study method is triadic. First, reading the text aloud slowly to allow the words to resonate in the mouth and ears. Second, silent reflection on each concept until it yields inner light. Third, practical application through meditation or ethical action that anchors the inside in lived experience. Study of Berudim without practice risks remaining sterile abstraction, for this gate demands embodiment. When the doctrine speaks of the mixture of mercy and judgment, the adept must feel in their own heart the tempering of passion by restraint, of zeal by patience, of rigor by compassion. Thus scholarship and sanctification merge. The inner technique most characteristic of Berudim is the meditation of clarifying sparks, Hibananet Hanazotzet. After the shattering of nikudim, sparks of light fell into every level of creation, clothed in material forms and human experiences. In this meditation, the adept sits in quiet awareness and allows memories, emotions, and desires to arise spontaneously. Each is seen as a vessel containing a spark. The practitioner gazes inwardly at each one, neither suppressing nor indulging it, but asking silently, what divine spark hides within this? Through patient attention, the outer shell of the experience dissolves, revealing a subtle light at its core. This light is then offered upward through the heart with a whispered phrase of unification, such as El Shem Yichid Kudshabrik Hu Yushakinta, for the sake of the union of the Holy One and his Shekinah. Over time, this practice transforms the way the adept perceives the world. Every event, pleasure, or pain becomes an opportunity for Be'er, a chance to lift sparks through awareness. On a ritual level, Berudim demands the cultivation of balance among the three lines of the tree: right, left, and center. The practical mystic may therefore construct a meditative diagram or altar representing these triads, with symbols of Chizd, water, Shevirat, fire, and Tiferet, air or balance, arranged before them. At dawn or twilight, one lights 3 flames and begins a slow recitation of psalm verses associated with each quality: Alam Chizd Yibineh for loving kindness, Tzedek Umisbat Imchan Kisicha for judgment, Hil Hagadol Hajiber Viha Nora for harmony. With each line, the adept focuses on integrating the qualities, breathing through the polarity until a deep inner equilibrium is felt. This ritual does not aim at ecstatic flight but at subtle attunement. It trains the soul to dwell in balance even amid multiplicity. The ethics of Berudim arise naturally from its metaphysics. If the universe itself is a field of clarification, then the human task is to act as a clarifier, someone who discerns the divine spark in every encounter and raises it through right relationship. The practitioner therefore lives with heightened attentiveness. In conversation, they listen for the spark in the words of others. In conflict, they search for the point of divine intention hidden beneath discord. This ethical stance transforms daily life into a continual rite of Be'er. Every meal, every exchange, every act of labor becomes an opportunity for elevation. The Lurianic masters taught that in this way even mundane acts participate in cosmic repair. When one eats with gratitude, the sparks within the food ascend. When one speaks truth, the fragments within language are rectified. Thus the life of Berudim is not separation from the world but luminous engagement with it. Advanced adepts extend this practice into the yichud of daily actions, yichud masim. Before performing any ordinary act, eating, working, speaking, they pause briefly, breathe, and form the intention that this act will serve the unification of the scattered sparks. A silent phrase anchors this intent: El Shem Yichud HaBerudim, for the sake of the clarifications. Through repetition, the habit of consciousness deepens, and each moment becomes a gate of ascent. In time, this awareness remains unbroken. The adept lives continuously in Berudim, perceiving every distinction as an invitation to unification. The inner physiology of Berudim also has a meditative counterpart. The 10 Sephirot correspond to bodily centers of energy and perception. In Akudim, these were undifferentiated. In Nikudim, they fractured. In Berudim, they intercommunicate through the central channel of breath. A daily practice thus involves gentle attention moving through the body from crown to feet, breathing light into each region, recognizing its quality: wisdom in the head, love in the chest, strength in the arms, foundation in the loins, receptivity in the feet. Each breath cycle gathers the scattered energies into a coherent flow. This embodiment anchors the cosmic teaching in the living organism, making the body itself a vessel of tikkun. Study of Berudim also entails immersion in sacred texts that themselves enact clarification. Chief among these are select passages of the Zohar describing the harmonization of the right and left pillars, and sections of the Etz Chaim, especially Gate 11, where Vital records the subtle intermixture of lights. The student reads these not as abstract metaphysics but as maps of inner experience. Each verse or concept is held in contemplation until it becomes luminous and then connected to a corresponding ethical or emotional pattern in life. For instance, when studying how Shevirat enters Chizd to temper excess kindness, the practitioner examines moments in their own behavior where generosity lacked boundaries, learning to integrate discernment. In this way, text, meditation, and life illuminate one another, forming a triune method of study unique to Berudim. Ultimately, to use Sha'ar HaBerudim is to engage in a continual act of spiritual discernment. The adept learns to ask in every situation: what is light, what is vessel, what is mixture, and what is to be clarified? This question becomes a mantra of awareness. In meditation, it reveals the structure of thoughts. In ethics, it reveals the path of right action. In ritual, it reveals the rhythm of creation itself. When this discernment becomes spontaneous, Berudim is realized not as a stage but as a state of consciousness. The soul itself becomes clarified, and through it, the world is clarified. In the unfolding of creation, the world of Berudim arises like dawn after the long night of Nikudim, when the divine lights, no longer shattered into isolation, begin to mingle with mercy and judgment in delicate proportion. This is the beginning of tikkun, not yet the completed repair, but the first breath of order after chaos. To study and practice Berudim is to learn how the infinite conducts this harmonizing within the very fabric of one's own awareness. The student of this gate contemplates how, from the ruins of the broken vessels, a new structure emerges, one in which no single light rules alone, but each is tempered and sustained by its companions. In the cosmic narrative, Berudim is the moment when the lights re-enter the vessels gradually, clothed and softened, so that the energies of Chizd, Shevirat, and Tiferet interpenetrate rather than collide. In human practice, this corresponds to the soul's slow recovery from fragmentation, the patient weaving of its impulses into a single living fabric. The adept sits quietly, remembering the scattered states of feeling, thought, and desire, and begins to breathe them back into relation. Each inhalation is the gathering of sparks. Each exhalation is their tempering in mercy. The act of breathing becomes a model of cosmic clarification, expansion and contraction held in balance, differentiation without separation, unity without confusion. At this stage, the practitioner begins to sense the three pillars of the tree of life as interior axes of perception. The right pillar, mercy, is experienced as warmth that expands through the chest. The left, judgment, as a subtle current of definition along the spine, and the central pillar as the quiet pulse that reconciles them both in the heart. In the practice known as the breathing of the three lines, the adept draws breath through the right nostril with awareness of loving-kindness, exhales through the left with awareness of restraint, then breathes evenly through both as the heart settles into balance. This rhythmic act, repeated in cycles of 10, mirrors the inter-inclusion of Berudim. It is said that when this equilibrium is attained, the breath itself carries the name of God as a living vibration, YH on the in-breath, WH on the out-breath, uniting the four letters through motion and rest. The cosmological contemplation accompanying this technique is subtle. One imagines the infinite light descending once more into the vacated space left by Tzimtzum, this time not in a single undifferentiated beam, but through the measured channels of Berudim. The light enters the 10 vessels slowly, each vessel now containing within itself traces of all the others, so that even judgment knows mercy, and mercy knows judgment. In meditation, this appears as an inner luminosity that does not dazzle or overwhelm, but clarifies, revealing contours without severing them. The practitioner trains to see the world in this way, to let every perception reveal its opposites within itself, to perceive compassion within severity and structure within grace. This is the contemplative hallmark of Berudim, the recognition that all qualities are intertwined, that harmony is achieved not by erasing difference but by weaving it into relationship. When this awareness deepens, a more advanced rite is undertaken, called the Yichud of clarified lights. The adept visualizes the 10 Sephirot as transparent spheres interlinked by threads of light, each pulse of breath sending gentle currents through the network. The aim is not ecstasy but lucidity. The practitioner silently intones short invocations, Chizd within Shevirat, Shevirat within Chizd, Tiferet within them both, until the distinctions themselves glow with harmony. As the meditation matures, emotional turbulence subsides, thoughts lose their harsh edges, even moral judgments soften into understanding. This is not moral relativism but higher discrimination, the ability to perceive each quality in its rightful measure. The Lurianic sages said that the world of Berudim is the workshop of measure, where the soul learns divine proportion. Study at this stage becomes another form of prayer. Reading passages of the Etz Chaim that describe Berudim, the student listens for resonance rather than argument. Each concept is allowed to echo through the faculties. The mind receives the structure, the heart receives the balance, and the body receives the rhythm. Notes are not merely written but sung under the breath. Four-tone reveals relationship more than words can. In this way, scholarship becomes a contemplative act. The text itself clarifies the reader. Some adepts accompany study with the drawing of subtle diagrams in sand or on paper, triangular arrangements of 10 points connected by lines of varying thickness to anchor the relationships in visual form. When the exercise ends, the diagram is erased, symbolizing that the true pattern must live within consciousness, not on the page. The practical ethics of Berudim now deepens into the discipline of proportion. Just as the vessels inter-include, so must the faculties of the soul. The adept practices alternating days of emphasis. One day leaning toward mercy, another toward rigor, always returning to the middle. This intentional oscillation prevents fixation and trains adaptability. In conversation, the practitioner listens for the balance between speaking and silence, in work, between effort and rest, in love, between giving and receiving. Each balanced moment becomes a microcosmic Berudim, a clarified state where the divine image is reflected without distortion. The teacher within this gate reminds the student, purity is not the absence of mixture, but the right relation of parts. Cosmologically, the world of Berudim is already the seat of Atzilut, the realm of emanation. When the clarifications reach completion, the light stabilize into the Partsufim, the organized faces of divinity that can relate and create. In meditation, this transition is felt as the birth of a new inner intelligence, an awareness that can act within harmony. The adept may experience this as an interior face or presence emerging from the web of lights, a sense of guidance, of divine personality shining through the clarified field. One does not cling to it as a vision, but allows it to orient the soul toward service. A ritual associated with this threshold is the offering of distinctions. Before dawn, the practitioner sits before 3 candles arranged in a triangle and contemplates all the contradictions within their life. With each exhalation, they name a pair of opposites: love and fear, joy and sorrow, clarity and confusion. And with each inhalation, they imagine a thread of light joining them in the heart. After 10 such breaths, the contradictions feel less like wounds and more like materials for creation. The practitioner extinguishes the central candle, leaving the 2 outer flames burning, signifying that unity hides within duality. When the candles are finally quenched, darkness itself feels luminous. This is the inner sign that Berudim has entered the soul. To use Berudim in daily life is to practice continual refinement. When a strong emotion arises, one pauses and asks, what spark seeks clarification here? If anger, what element of strength or truth does it contain? If sorrow, what longing for unity is hidden within it? The adept breathes until the spark reveals itself and offers that energy upward in awareness. Each small act of clarification mirrors the cosmic process. Each breath participates in divine repair. Over months and years, the personality becomes more transparent, capable of reflecting the divine attributes without distortion. When the process matures, the adept perceives the entire cosmos is engaged in Berudim. The growth of plants, the flow of rivers, the cycles of relationships, all are acts of distinction and reconciliation. Study of natural processes becomes another kind of Torah, revealing the law of balance written into creation. Some practitioners extend this into contemplative movement, walking meditations in which each step symbolizes the alternating rhythm of mercy and judgment. With the right foot, one advances kindness. With the left, discernment. The stride itself becomes Tiferet. Thus body and cosmos echo one another. The ultimate secret of Sha'ar HaBerudim is that clarification never ends. Even in Atzilut, the process continues as a dance of subtle distinctions within unity. To dwell in this awareness is to live as a clarifying presence, seeing clearly, acting proportionally, balancing continuously. The mystic who abides in Berudim walks through the world like a quiet harmonizer, turning conflict into complementarity, confusion into transparency. This is the fruition of the gate, the realization that every moment is an opportunity for refinement, every encounter a mirror of the divine balancing itself within creation. In the deeper movement of Sha'ar HaBerudim, once the soul has glimpsed the luminous balance that follows the chaos of the broken vessels, the work shifts from contemplation to sustained cultivation. What was once perceived in a flash of vision must now be trained into the fabric of attention, breath, and gesture. The world of Berudim is not static, it lives through repetition and refinement. To study it properly, the adept begins by establishing a rhythm of daily practice that mirrors its clarifying pulse. The day is divided into 3 phases: dawn, midday, and dusk, each reflecting one of the 3 pillars: mercy, harmony, and judgment. At dawn, the practitioner engages the cheesed meditation, awakening expansive kindness through long inhalations that fill the lungs without strain. Midday is reserved for the balancing of opposites through even breaths, equal inhalation and exhalation. Dusk belongs to the discipline of Shevirat, the controlled release of energy. Here the exhalations lengthen and become deliberate, symbolizing measured withdrawal. This simple cycle of breathing through the day embodies the structure of Berudim in lived time. When entering formal meditation, the adept begins by facing east and reciting quietly the verse Yatzer or Yuvori Chashek, who forms light and creates darkness, to remind the mind that clarity includes shadow. The breath is counted in a rhythm of 4, inhaling for a count of 4 heartbeats, holding for 4, exhaling for 4, resting for 4 before the next cycle. Each phase corresponds to a dimension of Berudim. The inhalation gathers scattered sparks, the hold unites them, the exhalation releases them into balance, and the pause allows the clarified light to settle. After several minutes, the practitioner introduces the visualization of the 10 luminous spheres arranged vertically before the inner eye, each connected by fine threads of silver light. The breath is then drawn up this column, from the feet through the crown, and released downward, as though one were polishing a chain of transparent jewels. The attention rests briefly in each sephira, whispering its name in sequence: Keter, Chakma, Bina, Chizd, Jevira, Tiferet, Netzach, Had, Yesod, Melkut. At first, these names may appear as abstractions, but with steady repetition their emotional tone becomes tangible. The student begins to sense where each quality resides in the body: Chizd blooming like warmth at the right shoulder, Jevira contracting like disciplined strength at the left, Tiferet glowing quietly in the heart. The aim is not to force visualization but to allow each attribute to clarify naturally, like an image emerging from mist. Over weeks of practice, the 10 spheres no longer stand apart, but shine through one another, each tinting its neighbors with subtle hues. This interillumination is the living experience of Berudim, distinctions held without separation. Study of text accompanies this practice. A single passage from the Etz Chaim or Pre-Etz Chaim is read slowly, aloud, before meditation, just enough to plant an idea in the mind. The text is not analyzed but allowed to resonate. For instance, one may take Luria's statement that in Berudim, the lights entered the vessels with interinclusion, and let the phrase circle gently during breathing. With every inhalation the mind repeats the lights entered, with every exhalation, with interinclusion. This turns study into a rhythmic mantra linking intellect and breath. Advanced practitioners alternate Hebrew and their native tongue, feeling how the vibration changes between languages. This experiment reveals how translation itself is a form of Berudim, a clarification between worlds. Ritual work extends this principle into the environment. The space of practice should be ordered but not sterile. A single lamp or candle, a bowl of clear water, and a small mirror represent the 3 aspects of Berudim: illumination, reflection, and transparency. Before beginning meditation, the practitioner wipes the mirror clean with a soft cloth, symbolizing the purification of perception. The candle is lit only after a moment of inner silence. Its flame should be steady, not flickering, for turbulence in the flame mirrors imbalance in the breath. Some adepts anoint the wick with a drop of frankincense oil, whose scent encourages clarity without agitation. The ethical application of Berudim begins with speech. One undertakes the discipline of measured words, committing to pause one full breath before answering any question of consequence. This single act of restraint brings the cosmic pattern into conversation. The breath of cheese gathers impulse, the moment of silence integrates Bina, and the response emerges from Tiferet. Practiced consistently, this transforms ordinary dialogue into a microcosmic act of tikkun. Similarly, the adept learns to examine motives before action. A daily review at dusk asks 3 questions. Was mercy balanced with discernment? Was judgment tempered with compassion? Did harmony guide the heart between them? The answers are not for self-criticism, but for calibration, ensuring that the inner world remains proportionate. As meditation deepens, the practitioner encounters the phenomenon known as inner splendor, a subtle light perceived behind closed eyes, neither purely visual nor imaginary. It appears when the mental faculties themselves begin to harmonize. Intellect no longer dominates emotion, nor emotion intellect. To stabilize this state, the adept practices the candle meditation of balance. Sitting before the flame, one observes without blinking for the span of 7 breaths, then closes the eyes and sees the after image at the brow. The flame is then visualized descending into the heart and spreading gentle radiance through the body. With each heartbeat, the radiance pulses outward, clarifying the field of sensation. The aim is to perceive every bodily impression, heat, sound, movement, as part of a single balanced vibration. When the eyes reopen, the outer flame and the inner flame appear as reflections of one another. This recognition is the experiential threshold of Berudim. Another exercise practiced monthly during the waxing moon is the clarification of relations. The adept writes the names of individuals with whom there is tension or misunderstanding on slips of parchment. Each name is placed in a circle around the candle. During meditation, the practitioner visualizes threads of light connecting the heart to each name, breathing in understanding and exhaling forgiveness. The purpose is not sentimental but structural, to reorder the emotional vessels so that energy flows without obstruction. Afterward, the parchments are burned, symbolizing release. This ritual enacts in miniature the cosmic clarification, the ordering of fragmented relations into balanced harmony. Cosmologically, the adept contemplates the transformation of Berudim into Atzilut as an inner horizon. As distinctions become perfectly clarified, the divine faces, Partsufim, Abba, Ima, Zir Anpin, and Nukva emerge as relational intelligences. In practice, this appears as a shift from impersonal light to living presence. Guidance, intuition, and compassionate intelligence begin to move through the practitioner spontaneously. The student is advised to greet these impressions with reverence, but without attachment, recognizing them as the natural flowering of balance. To test their authenticity, one asks, does this impulse increase proportion and peace, or does it amplify division? Only the first is true Berudim. Finally, the integration of this gate requires service. The adept translates inner harmony into outward act. Some choose acts of quiet reconciliation, mending old relationships, mediating disputes, or creating art that brings diverse elements into coherence. Each action performed in the spirit of balance reinforces the inner pattern. When mistakes rise, they are not failures but opportunities for further clarification. The student learns to see every disturbance as a fragment of light-seeking integration. This attitude, carried into all circumstances, completes the descent of Berudim from mystic vision into daily life. In time, the boundaries between meditation, study, and living dissolve. Breathing itself becomes prayer, conversation becomes clarification. The world reveals itself as a perpetual bearer, a refining of light through countless vessels. The adept walks gently, aware that each perception is both distinct and transparent, each moment a mirror of divine equilibrium. To reach this state is not to have finished the work, but to have become a conscious participant in its endless unfolding, the living embodiment of Sha'ar HaBerudim. As the adept moves deeper within the unfolding of Sha'ar HaBerudim, there comes a moment when the harmony of the clarified vessels begins to dissolve the very distinction between self and the light that shapes it. This is not a moment of sudden illumination, but a slow turning, as if the heart itself were a prism refracting its own inner breath. The breath of Berudim, once measured and deliberate, begins to expand into a living river of interwoven perception. Within this river, the 10 spheres no longer remain separate points of focus. They become a single, luminous body that breathes in harmony with the whole. This is the threshold of Atzilut, where balance transcends itself and becomes a living presence. In the vision of Luria, this passage is not abstract but embodied as the birth of the Partsufim, the divine faces, Abba and Ima, Zir Anpin and Nukva. These are not static forms but living realities of relationship, arising when the interplay of mercy and judgment achieves its fullest expression. To encounter them is to stand within a transformation of perception. In meditation, the adept finds that the luminous spheres of Berudim begin to coalesce into faces of light, each carrying a voice, a tone, a pulse. Abba appears as an unbounded expansiveness, a depth beyond thought, resonant with infinite question and potential. Ima follows as a silence of knowing, an inward listening that does not answer but unfolds. Zir Anpin comes forth as the harmonized wool, radiating clarity through action, while Nukva emerges as the sweetness of response, the embrace that completes the cycle of giving and receiving. To perceive these Partsufim is not to construct an image but to enter a living relationship. In the deeper practice of Sha'ar HaBerudim, the adept learns to allow the boundaries of the self to soften so that these presences can arise spontaneously within the field of consciousness. This is achieved through what Luria intimates as the breath of interinclusion, a breath that does not only move inward or outward, but circulates between them. In practice, this means entering a state of sustained awareness in which inhalation and exhalation lose their distinction, merging into a continuous movement that is both creation and reception. In that movement, the Partsufim do not stand as separate figures, but as living dynamics of being, each a voice within the harmony. This is the mystical work of Berudim, to prepare the inner vessel so fully that the transition into Atzilut becomes a living experience. It is not a single vision but a continuous transformation, a slow unveiling of unity and multiplicity. In the quiet hours before dawn, the adept sits in stillness, breathing softly, and lets the 10 spheres dissolve into a single radiance. Within that radiance comes the sense of faces, not faces fixed in form, but faces of light that breathe and speak through the silence. To listen to them is to perceive the language of Atzilut, a language without words in which knowing and being are one. The transition is both inward and outward. Inward, because it demands a letting go of the self as a distinct container. Outward, because the light of Atzilut manifests as relationship, the living encounter between the self and all that is. Luria describes this as the birth of harmony in action. The vessels that in Berudim stood in balance now stand as living beings, each a mode of divine life. To enter this state is to pass beyond the conceptual and into the direct experience of communion. The adept may find that ordinary perception begins to shift, the edges of objects soften, sounds gain a timbre of presence, and even thought begins to feel as though it flows from a deeper source. At this threshold, practice becomes both silence and song. The breath, the meditation, the study of texts, and the ritual of daily life merge into a single stream. The adept ceases to measure the spheres as separate steps and instead learns to dwell within the flow itself. This dwelling is not a goal to be attained but a living condition to be embodied, a continuous turning toward the harmony that is both source and outcome. In that turning, the Partsufim become not distant presences but intimate companions, guiding the adept into deeper clarity. Abba as the unbounded question, Ima as the silent knowing, Zir Anpin as the ordered will, and Nukva as the living response. These are no longer ideas but the felt reality of balanced being. The mystical path of Sha'ar HaBerudim thus becomes the path of living Atzilut, where the soul no longer studies harmony but lives in it. In this living, there is no separation between study and action, prayer and breath, self and world. Every moment is an entry into relationship with the divine faces. The adept moves through the world with a quiet gaze, seeing not only the form of things, but the living interplay of light that sustains them. This is the fruit of the work, to walk in the world as a vessel of clarity, carrying within oneself the living harmony of the clarified lights. To hold this state is not a matter of striving but of return, a constant return to the breath that unites mercy and judgment, the silence that gives rise to knowing, and the openness that allows the divine faces to speak. This return becomes a rhythm of life, a continuous attunement to the deeper movement of reality. For Luria, this is the ultimate teaching of Sha'ar HaBerudim, that the work of the soul is not to control the lights but to receive them, to dwell within their harmony, and to allow that harmony to shape every act of living. Thus, the transition into Atzilut is not a distant attainment but the living heart of the path itself, and the adept becomes a conscious participant in the endless unfolding of the divine harmony. As the adept continues within the luminous unfolding of Sha'ar HaBerudim, there comes a turning point that is less an arrival than a deepening, a settling into a place where the movement of the vessels has become a movement of the self itself. This is the realm of stabilized Atzilut, the living field in which the Partsufim no longer rise as fleeting visions but as constant presences, speaking without words and guiding without effort. The breath itself becomes the threshold of perception, a subtle rhythm that neither begins nor ends, a continuity in which giving and receiving merge. It is here that the student begins to perceive what Luria calls the language of the light, an inner speech that is not thought, but the felt presence of divine harmony. To dwell here is to dwell within the clarifying heart of the world, where the vessels no longer contain, but radiate, and the boundaries between self and light dissolve. This transformation is not sudden, but the result of disciplined attunement. The adept who seeks to remain in this state returns each day to what might seem a simple practice, yet is profound in its effect, the practice of the breath of the unified face. At dawn, before speech or thought arises, the adept sits in stillness and lets the breath lengthen and soften until it becomes a single, unbroken wave. With each inhalation, the attention rises toward Abba, toward the infinite depth that asks without answering. With each exhalation, the attention turns toward Ima, receiving in silence the fullness of knowing. The rhythm of breath comes to mirror the pulse of the Partsufim themselves, an eternal giving and receiving in which mercy and judgment breathe one another into being. Over time, this practice removes the sense of distance from the divine. The breath becomes both doorway and dwelling, and the living presence of Atzilut rests within the body as a constant field. In this dwelling, perception itself transforms. The world is no longer seen as a collection of separate forms, but as a single living harmony, each object an aspect of a greater illumination. The adept's inner vision begins to include not only light, but sound and movement. Colors take on tone, and sound carries the texture of form. This is the language of Atzilut, in which the senses themselves become channels of divine speech. The Partsufim are no longer metaphysical constructs but living presences within perception. Abba as the depth of silence, Ima as the stillness of knowing, Zir Anpin as the pulse of harmony, and Nukva as the flowing fullness of relationship. To abide in this state is to abide within the clarifying work of Berudim itself, now fully transfigured into the living reality of union. The adept learns that sustaining this dwelling is not a matter of technique alone, but of a continual return to openness. This is expressed in what Luria calls the prayer of the unified face, a turning of the heart that needs no words, only a willingness to receive. In practice, this prayer can be as simple as a moment of silent attention before any action, a pause in which the breath lengthens and the heart opens. In that pause, the harmony of the Partsufim is invited to dwell within the moment. Over months and years, this becomes a living discipline, an unbroken thread weaving every gesture and thought into the living harmony of Atzilut. There is also a deeper season of practice, a threshold rite within Sha'ar HaBerudim, which the adept approaches only after sustained attunement, the vision of the unified face. This is not a vision in the ordinary sense but an interior turning in which the self itself dissolves into the radiance of the Partsufim. The adept sits in stillness, breathing slowly, and lets the luminous spheres of Berudim fade into a single sphere of living light. Within that light there is no distinction of form, only the sense of a face, not a face fixed in shape, but a living presence that is both giving and receiving, asking and answering. To abide within this vision is to dwell in Atzilut, not as an idea, but as an ongoing reality. The breath carries the vision into the body, so that it is not an isolated experience, but a sustained state of being. The living presence of the unified face transforms speech. Words cease to be instruments of assertion and become channels of harmony. The adept finds that prayer itself becomes a breath, a quiet attunement rather than a request. Speech becomes prayer, and prayer becomes life. This is the heart of Luria's teaching, that the work of the soul in Berudim is not merely to clarify but to embody the clarifying light so fully that the breath, speech, and deed become one. The adept learns to speak with measured silence, to act with balanced intent, to live in the harmony of the vessels perfected. In this state, the experience of Atzilut is no longer confined to the meditation chamber. It flows into every encounter, every action, every moment of life. The adept begins to perceive the living interplay of the Partsufim within the world, Abba in the deep questions of existence, Ima in the silent knowing that underlies intuition, Zir Anpin in the creative ordering of life, and Nukva in the harmony of relationship. To walk in this world is to walk within the living dance of the divine faces, each step a breathing prayer, each movement a clarifying of light. The stability of Atzilut rests upon the continual renewal of this living relationship. Luria teaches that the work of Sha'ar HaBerudim is not completed in a single lifetime, but is a perpetual unfolding. Each day, each breath, becomes an offering, a return to the unity from which all life flows. The adept learns to regard every disturbance, every moment of dissonance, as an invitation to return to the breath of harmony. This is the discipline of the clarified vessels, to meet each moment as a chance for renewal, to live within the perpetual turning of mercy and judgment, to dwell always within the living heart of Atzilut. Thus, the mystical work of Sha'ar HaBerudim reaches its culmination not in knowledge alone, but in the living embodiment of unity. It becomes a way of being in which the soul does not stand apart, but moves within the living harmony of the divine faces. Breath, vision, speech, and deed converge into a single movement, and the world is revealed as an endless unfolding of the clarifying light. To dwell in this way is to dwell within the very heart of creation, to walk in the world as a living vessel of the divine harmony, and to become, in the language of Luria, a conscious participant in the eternal work of Tikkun. The final passage of the way in Sha'ar HaBerudim is not a closing but an opening, the opening of the soul into what Luria calls the ever-flowing doorway of Adam Kadmon. This doorway is not built by study alone but is lived through the embodiment of the clarified vessels, the breath of the unified face, and the continual attunement to the living harmony of the Partsufim. To reach this threshold is to stand in the place where all distinctions dissolve, mercy and judgment, giving and receiving, silence and speech, self and world, becoming one eternal movement. It is here that the adept realizes that Berudim is not an isolated gate but the living hinge between the hidden worlds and the manifest world of divine light. It is here that the heart opens fully into Adam Kadmon, the primordial form, the archetype of the living soul of creation. In the mystical path of Sha'ar HaBerudim, Adam Kadmon is not a static figure but a living field of unity, the complete harmonization of all divine names, faces, and lights. He is the breath of Atzilut made manifest, the living form in which mercy and judgment stand in perfect balance, the eternal face that reflects the divine will. To enter into Adam Kadmon is not to gain knowledge, but to become a vessel of the knowledge itself, a living embodiment of the harmony of creation. In the inward journey, this becomes an experiential turning in which the adept's own inner form, the soul, the breath, the mind, aligns with the primordial structure of being. This is the doorway that Sha'ar HaBerudim opens, the transformation of the self into a living part of the cosmic harmony. The work at this stage moves beyond the separate practice of meditation or prayer. It becomes a constant dwelling within the flow of the clarified vessels, a living attunement in every breath, every thought, every action. The adept no longer enters the doorway of Adam Kadmon as one who seeks, but as one who receives and gives in unbroken unity. This is the great teaching of Luria, that the perfected vessel is not built by striving but by continuous return, by the patient turning of the soul to the harmony already present. Every breath becomes a prayer, every silence a teaching, every movement a living expression of divine union. To live in this way is to live within the perpetual song of Berudim, the song that contains the harmonies of all worlds. The Partsufim, Abba, Ima, Zir Anpin, Nukva, become not separate presences, but living voices within a single song, each voice flowing into the other without distinction. In that song, the world itself becomes a living liturgy. Every sound, every movement, every encounter becomes part of an endless offering to the living face of Adam Kadmon. This is the mystical consummation of Berudim, the full transformation of life into prayer, of the self into a channel of harmony, of existence into the perpetual dwelling of the divine. The adept learns that this transformation cannot be held as a fixed attainment, but must be renewed at every moment. Adam Kadmon is not a final state, but an ever-renewing doorway, a living threshold that requires constant openness. The breath of Berudim, the inward and outward breathing of mercy and judgment, becomes the rhythm of life itself, the continual turning of the soul toward unity. In every breath there is a choice, to close and contract, or to open and enter again into the living harmony of the vessels. This is the discipline of the highest Kabbalah, not to reach a final state, but to dwell perpetually in the turning of the soul toward the divine face. In the deepest experience of this path, the adept discovers that the doorway of Adam Kadmon is not separate from daily life but is present within every moment. To walk, to speak, to breathe, to love, each becomes an entry into the living harmony of Atzilut. The vessel perfected in Berudim is not a distant attainment, but the living form of the soul itself, a soul shaped by the eternal turning of mercy and judgment. This is the true teaching of Sha'ar HaBerudim, that the work of the soul is to become a living parts of, a living expression of the unity of Adam Kadmon, a constant dwelling in the harmonies that sustain all worlds. Thus, the mystic journey of Sha'ar HaBerudim ends in an unending beginning. The adept no longer studies harmony as a concept but lives within it as a reality. The breath, the prayer, the vision, the deed, all become a single living movement and eternal attunement to the unity of creation. To enter this state is to enter the heart of Adam Kadmon, to dwell in the living harmony of the divine face, to become a conscious participant in the great work of Tikkun, the repair and harmonization of all worlds. This is the gift of Sha'ar HaBerudim, the revelation that the vessel perfected is not something attained once, but as a living presence to be renewed in every breath, in every moment, in every turning of the soul toward the face of the infinite. And so the path continues without end. The gates of Berudim remain open to the seeker who walks with breath and silence, with prayer and vision, with openness and return. In the heart of Adam Kadmon lies the eternal harmony, and to dwell there is not a matter of distant striving but of living each moment as the doorway itself, breathing the living song of unity and becoming in that, breathing the harmony that sustains all being.